I need to tell you about a night that almost broke my marriage. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because I finally said something out loud that I'd been carrying since I was 6 years old. My girls were 2.5 and 1 at the time. It was just a regular night. There were baths, there were books, the whole routine. And after they were down, my wife, Claire, and I were sitting together, and something just cracked open in me. I don't remember honestly what triggered it exactly. I think it was a day where I'd lost my patience with my oldest over something small, something like getting dressed, not listening, one of those nothing moments that happens 40 times a day when you have a toddler. And the guilt afterward had been so heavy, so disproportionate, that I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I told Claire that I felt like I was failing, that I felt like I was fundamentally inadequate, that I was afraid, not of any specific thing, but of a thing I'd been afraid of my entire adult life. That if she really knew me, if she saw all the way through to whatever was at the center of me, she would find something there that would make her leave. And here's what happened. Here's what the wound does. I said all of that, the most vulnerable, honest thing that I think at that point in my life I'd ever said to another person. And her first response was to think it was about her. That I was trying to tell her something about how I felt about her, about our marriage. She heard, "I'm afraid you'll leave," and translated it into, "He wants to leave." She couldn't understand that what I was saying had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a 6-year-old boy who'd been told, not in words, but in absence, that he wasn't worth staying for. We both cried that night, a lot. She was terrified that I was falling out of love with her. I was certain that she was eventually going to leave me. Two people in the same bed with two completely different fears, and both fears pointed at the same outcome, the end of us, which meant that we were building the very thing that we were afraid of. She was pulling away because she thought I didn't want her. I was holding back because I thought she'd eventually see through me and go. Different fears, same destination. And both of them started with my father. Now, I need to tell you about how a father leaves. Not in the movies, where there's a suitcase and a slammed door and everyone understands what's happening. In real life, how it actually works when you're 6. My father didn't leave all at once. He left the same way that the tide goes out. He left so slowly that you don't realize the water's receding until you suddenly find that you're standing on dry sand. He started being gone more during the day. I just assumed that he was working. He'd come back for dinner, sit with us, and then leave again. That was the first phase. I didn't question it. When you're 6, your parents are the architecture of reality, right? If dad leaves after dinner and comes back in the morning, that's just what dads do. You don't interrogate the walls of your house. They're just there. Then there were the sleepovers. That's what they were called, family sleepovers. The kids would all camp out in the family room, and dad would sleep on the couch. I thought it was fun. I thought we were doing something special. I didn't understand that a man sleeping on his own couch is not a man having an adventure with his kids. It's a man halfway out the door. But at 6, I didn't have the framework for that. I just knew that I fell asleep on the floor next to my dad, and that felt like closeness. He'd be gone before we were really up in the morning. Off to work, I assumed. Always off to work. And then we moved. My family moved to another state, and he just didn't come with us. That's it. That's the story. There was no confrontation, no explanation, no moment where someone sat me down and said, "Your father isn't going to live with us anymore." We moved. He didn't come. And the thing I'd been living inside of, that slow recession, the gradual disappearing, became permanent without anyone ever naming it. He just never showed up again. I want to stay with that for just a second, because I think that the way it happened, at least to me, the way that I experienced it, matters. I think if there had been a clear moment, a fight, a door slam, a goodbye, I might have had something to push against, something to grieve, right? A defined loss with edges that I could feel and define and poke and prod at and come to understand. But this had no edges. This was just fog. This was a presence that became an absence so gradually that I couldn't even identify that moment of transition, which meant that I couldn't grieve it. Because you can't mourn a loss that you can't locate, right? And because I couldn't locate it, because there was no single moment where my father left, my child brain did what child brains do. It made the whole thing my fault. Not consciously, of course, right? No 6-year-old sits down and thinks, "I have rationally concluded that my father's departure was the result of my personal inadequacy." It's so much deeper than that. It's pre-verbal. It's architectural. The foundation of your understanding of how love works, it just gets poured at that age. And mine got poured around an absence. And the shape of the absence said, people leave. They leave slowly and without explanation. And the reason they leave is something inside you that you can't see and can't fix, but that will eventually become visible to anyone who gets close enough. That was what I carried for years, for decades, literal decades, into friendships, into relationships, into my marriage. The absolute certainty that I contained something, some deficiency, some unworthiness that was hidden from view, but that proximity would eventually reveal. And once it was revealed, the person would do what my father did. Not all at once, gradually, the tide going out. By the time I noticed, they'd already be gone. So I did at that point what I think a lot of kids do when they're handed that particular wound, right? I became perfect. Not actually perfect, relentlessly achieving. If I couldn't fix that hidden thing, that thing deep inside me that drove people away, I could at least build something on top of it that was impressive enough to keep people close. Good grades, accomplishments, being reliable, being exceptional, being so undeniably valuable that even if someone glimpsed that broken thing underneath, hopefully the surface would be worth staying for, right? I want you to understand how exhausting that is. Not the achieving itself, right? I was good at that. The vigilance, the constant monitoring. Am I enough right now? Is this relationship still secure? Have they seen something? Is the tide going out? You are never, ever at rest. Every single interaction is an assessment. Every moment of distance from someone you love is evidence that the leaving has begun. And it is an impossible standard, because the premise is that your worth is conditional on performance. And no one performed perfectly all the time. So the failures accumulate. Not real failures, right? The normal, human, inevitable failures of being a person, being short with someone, having a bad day, not being available, being less than extraordinary for 5 minutes. And each one registers not as a normal fluctuation, but as a crack in the facade. Each one is the beginning of the end. I carried all of this with me into fatherhood. And then something happened that I wasn't prepared for, even though I should have been, because I had literally studied it. I have a graduate education in child development and infant mental health. I've read the research. I know the literature on attachment, on co-regulation, on sensitive responsiveness, on everything that contributes to a child's optimal development. I chose that field. And I don't think that this is a coincidence, especially not now, because I wanted to understand what had happened to me. And I wanted to make sure that it never happened to my children. So when my daughters were born, I had a script. I had a map. I knew exactly what a securely attached child needed from a parent. I knew about attunement and rupture and repair. I knew about the still face paradigm and the importance of contingent responding and the way that a parent's nervous system becomes the scaffolding for a child's developing brain. I had the entire blueprint, and the blueprint nearly destroyed me. Because here's what happens when you know exactly what perfect parenting looks like, and you believe in the deepest part of yourself that imperfection will cost you everything. You parent from a state of absolute terror. Every interaction with your child becomes a test, not of their development, right? But of your worth. Every moment of impatience is a failure. Every time you raise your voice, every time you're less present than you think you should be, every time you choose the wrong response or miss a cue or just run out of gas at the end of a long day. It doesn't register as normal parenting. It registers as the beginning of the pattern, your father's pattern, the pattern where the leaving starts. So I would lose my patience with my 2-year-old the way that every parent on earth loses patience with a 2-year-old, because 2-year-olds are designed to test limits, and losing patience occasionally is not a pathology, it is a Tuesday. And the guilt that followed would absolutely flatten me. Not proportionate guilt. Not, I shouldn't have snapped. I'll do better next time kind of guilt. Crushing, annihilating guilt. Because in my mind, the equation was crystal clear. My father failed as a parent and left. I am failing as a parent. Therefore, I will leave or be left. The pattern is inevitable. The wound is hereditary. I am becoming him. And the thing about my education, right? The thing that made it a curse as much as a blessing is that I knew exactly how far the gap was between what I was doing and what the research said I should be doing. I had a precise, empirically validated measuring stick for my own inadequacy. Most dads who lose their patience feel bad for a minute and move on, right? I could cite the specific studies about parental harshness and cortisol reactivity and long-term outcomes. I had the data, and the data filtered through my wound didn't say, you're a normal parent having a hard moment. The data said, you are measurably, scientifically failing your children. I also knew, and this is important, that most of the research on parenting was built on mothers. The body of literature is what it is. So the standard I was holding myself to wasn't just the standard of a perfect parent, it was the standard of a perfect mother applied to a father by a man who was already convinced he was inherently deficient. The bar wasn't just high. It was designed for a different body, a different hormonal reality, a different societal context, and I was trying to clear it through sheer force of will and terror. So that night, with Claire, with my wife, the night that I finally said it out loud, I think part of what broke open was the sheer exhaustion of it all. Not physical exhaustion, though there was plenty enough of that. It was the exhaustion of performing worthiness every single day, of building the surface, maintaining the facade, watching for that tide, of parenting two tiny children while simultaneously monitoring myself for signs that I was becoming the man who left. I was so tired of being afraid. And when I told Claire, when I said, I think everyone who gets close to me will eventually find the thing that made my father leave, and then they'll leave too. It was the first time that I'd ever put language on a wound I'd been living inside of since before I even had language. It had just been the water that I swam in, the air in every single room. And suddenly it had words. And the words were outside of me instead of inside. And Claire was still there. She didn't leave. She cried and she was scared, but she didn't leave. I wrote in my journal the next morning, and I remember this clearly because I read it back to myself for years afterward. I wrote about what an incredibly blessed concept it was, the word together. That we could work on this together. That the wound didn't have to be mine alone. That the thing that I had been hiding, the inadequacy that I'd been certain would drive her away, she'd seen it now. She'd seen all the way through. And she was still sitting next to me. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Because knowing the wound and healing the wound are not the same thing. I knew it intellectually that night, right? I wouldn't understand it in my body for another decade. It wasn't until last year, in therapy, years into this journey, that I finally understood the engine underneath everything, the real mechanism. Not just my father left and it hurt, but the specific operational way that that wound had been running my life. Because my father left, I believed that love was conditional on performance. That I had to be achieving, had to be perfect, had to be beyond reproach, or I would be abandoned. And because I knew fully well that I wasn't perfect, because no one is, because always achieving grandly is not sustainable, because you cannot maintain a flawless performance for an entire life, I lived in a constant state of anticipatory grief. I was always pre-mourning the loss of the people I loved, because I knew that the performance would slip. And when it did, they would see, and when they saw, they would leave. My therapist helped me see something I'd missed. That the perfection wasn't the response to the wound. The perfection was the wound. The belief that you must earn love, that love must be earned, is itself the injury. A child whose father stays doesn't grow up believing love must be purchased with achievement. A child whose father stays grows up believing love is the default condition. That you are loved not because of what you do, but because of who you are. That belonging is not a performance. I never learned that. I learned the opposite. I learned that belonging is a lease that comes up for renewal every day. And the rent is perfection. And one missed payment means eviction. And I'd been paying that rent for 30 years. If you're a dad who grew up without a father, or with a father who was there in body but gone in every way that mattered, I think there's a chance that you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe not the specifics, right? Maybe your version doesn't involve perfection or achievement. Maybe yours shows up as control or withdrawal or anger or the inability to be fully present because part of you is always braced for impact. But the engine is the same. You are waiting to be left. You are certain that you will be left. And everything you do as a partner and a father is colored by that certainty. And here's what I want to say to you from the place that I'm standing now, which is far from healed, but closer to honest than I have ever been. That fear that you are becoming your father, that fear is the proof that you are not. My father didn't agonize over whether he was a good dad. My father didn't lie awake at night crushed by guilt over losing his patience with a toddler. My father didn't sit with his wife and weep about his inadequacy. My father didn't go to therapy. My father didn't read the research or worry about attachment or ask himself whether he was doing enough. My father just left. And you, the one listening to this at 2 a.m. with a baby monitor on the nightstand and a weight on your chest, you are still here. You are here, and you are terrified, and the terror itself is the evidence that you have already broken the pattern. Not perfectly, not completely. You don't have to break it completely. You just have to be the man who stays and keeps trying. I still catch myself performing. I still hear the voice that says that I have to be exceptional or I'll lose everything. I still feel that gut punch of guilt when I'm less than the father I think I should be. But I know where it comes from now. I know its name. And when it shows up, when I snap at one of my girls and that shame starts its familiar cascade, I can stop myself most of the time and say, that's the wound talking. That's the 6-year-old who thinks love is a performance. That's the boy whose father left and who decided it must have been his fault. And then I do the thing that my father never did. I go back to my daughter. I get down on her level. I say, I'm sorry. I say, Dad got frustrated and that wasn't okay. And it's not your fault. And I'm right here. And I stay. I don't stay because I've been healed. I stay because I've decided that staying is not something you earn the right to do by being perfect. Staying is just a choice that you make again and again on the days when it's easy and the days when you're certain you don't deserve to be in the room. Claire is still here. My girls are growing. We are very, very far from perfect, but we are together. And I am learning slowly in my bones, in the place below language, The thing I should have learned when I was 6. You don't have to earn this. You just have to stay. I will see you in the next one.